Hello everyone, we're going to be discussing resource development, some strategies for nonprofit leaders, and I'm Eric Rausch. So what we'll be covering first is sort of an overview of resource development. We'll discuss different types of resources available for nonprofits, some of the basic techniques for nonprofit leaders to implement to obtain these resources, challenges and limitations that are often associated with different types of resources, and I have an example of a really innovative nonprofit that came up with a way to provide a valuable resource to other nonprofits, and that's what DonorsChoose.org. And we can wrap things up with a conclusion. So I'm sure you're all wondering, why should nonprofit leaders need to develop strategic planning for resources? Well, for one, it provides the ability to support programs and services. It can strengthen your organization and provide great growth potential. Also, when we tend to focus on gaining new resources, we tend to look at it a little bit one-dimensionally. We forget that there's a great opportunity to build supportive relationships in the process. So while we're so focused on getting that government grant or contract, we need to realize that the people we're working with, nurturing and building those relationships can provide a great source of opportunity in the future. Also, it attracts people and institutions to your organization and mission, because after all, people want to be associated with winners. So here's two quotes I thought were very appropriate for this presentation. One's from Simon Malian. There's a picture of him on the right. A little background on Simon. He's the founder of the Malian Foundation. Simon's 22 years old, and he's a former IBM consultant. And what he realized is that sometimes nonprofits need expertise just as much as they need money. So what Simon created was a website where nonprofits can go and seek assistance from skilled professionals. I love this quote. He says, "I love seeing other people achieve their goals, things they would normally not have the ability to do themselves." And below Simon's quote is a quote from Dr. Brown. Nonprofit leaders are questioning why resource development is so important. Very poignantly, it determines the success or failure of your organization. So let's discuss some of the different types of resources available. So you got earned income, which can come in the form of fees or membership dues, personal gifts, like a cash donation. You have institutional giving, like a foundation grant. You have government funding, which can be like a grant or government contract. You have investment income, which can be an endowment or let's say rent if they own property. In-kind support, human capital. This is a more dynamic category. Put clothing, but it could be canned goods, volunteers. A little harder to quantify those, but very, very important. From a national average, program fees, or the earned income, is roughly 50% of nonprofit revenues. Government funding constitutes about 30%, and the remaining 20%, is divided up between charitable donations and investments, in-kind, gifts, etc. Here's some implementation techniques. So there's several, but these two I felt were pretty important. You have your environmental analysis, and then you have your benefits approach. So nonprofit leaders need to know what is going on and what is available to them, and evaluate and understand both the external environment, but also the internal environment or operating environment, which is really critical to recognize the needs of your beneficiaries and stakeholders, to understand the volunteer and labor and funding opportunities, the economic condition. If this was 2008 and we were in the middle of a financial collapse and a recession, clearly if Congress starts cutting program budgets and donors are struggling to pay their mortgage, that's clearly going to affect nonprofit funding. Looking at the benefits approach, it's a more comprehensive approach, looking at the effectiveness, sticking to your mission, solvency, income interactions, your capacity to handle these resources, risk management, things associated with the resources, and it's necessary for nonprofits to be able to finance themselves, and of course they would like to have ideally a nice mix of different resources, such as government contracts or fees or in-kind gifts, but they need to make sure that the resources are that they match their mission and the direction of their organization and the public and private services they provide. Nonprofit leaders should first consider their mission first before deciding on which resources they should pursue. And then they can develop a strategy to secure funding from the various resource opportunities that are available to them. So instead of just looking at how we should maximize or increase our different income or resource avenues, we really should take more of the benefit approach and ask yourself two important questions. One is, are we using the right forms of resources to best serve our beneficiaries and stakeholders? And two, what mix of resources would provide a better benefit to our constituents as well as strengthen our organization? So with the benefits approach, mission effectiveness is really discussing, are we accomplishing our goals and maximizing our resource opportunities? Then you have solvency. So do we have stable cash flow, and are we creating future pipelines? Income interaction, how are our income sources affecting our organization, mission goals, and relationships? Now this is tricky because how our organization is perceived and if you will, some of the fallout from different resources needs to be considered before pursuing that resource. Organizational capacity is pretty straightforward. Can our organization, are we prepared to handle this? If we get that new contract, do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the skilled personnel to comply with the terms of that contract? And conversely, are we underutilizing our ability to get new sources of income? Are we staying stagnant? Are we not being creative enough? Are we not being aggressive enough? And then with risk management, diversification, cost, stability, reputation, it's great to diversify, but are we spreading ourselves too thin? There's always a risk associated with different types of funding. And we need to recognize that and consider that before jumping on board. With your environmental analysis, nonprofit leaders first, they need to identify the key elements in the environment. They need to understand what's available to them. That's scanning. And from there, you do what they call as monitoring. And that's where you track these elements over time to spot trends and significant changes. And that is going to help you with the forecasting. And if you are looking at a government contract, you need to know the terms of the contract. Is it a 12-month? Is it a 2 year? Is it a 3-year? You need to know so that you can build your pipeline and budget accordingly for your programs and services. And then you need to do a little assessing. And you consider how these elements may impact your organizational activity. Are they good for you? Are they aligned with your goals? So I thought of doing a little bullet point like action plan for nonprofit leaders. And they need to first identify, what resources they're considering, what management issues with those resources they foresee. They need to evaluate, is this resource appropriate? Is it useful for us? Is it achievable? And from there, you do a little bit of assessing. What's the cost benefit? What's the effectiveness? What are the risks associated? And after you do that, you have to decide. You have to choose which resource opportunities are going to work for us, and which ones are going to fit best with our organization. Once you decide, you need to execute. So you need to go ahead and make a decision and then carry out that management strategy to develop that resource. So here's some challenges and limitations that need to be considered. So you have the potential for increased bureaucracy, like we're saying. While you're beefing up your workforce, while you're adding skilled professionals to manage and handle these contracts, you're creating committees, you're adding different divisions, you're really adding more bureaucracy, which could lead to communication breakdown, confusion, leadership issues, and also it can lead to mission creep, which is where it's great to get these revenue sources, but are you consuming your organization with fulfilling the demands of these contracts? And are you spending more time on that really than what your mission is trying to accomplish? What your organization stands for. If you do that, then it's very easily to get off track and become really something else that you didn't intend to be. There's added cost that can be associated with it. Adding more employees and consultants. Cash flow gaps from slow pay government. A lot of government is sort of notorious for being a slow pay, and that can hurt you with your forecasting your budgets. I mean, when a contract's ending and you're assuming to get paid, then if you don't receive payment for 5-6 months afterwards, I mean, that can really hurt your funding and hurt programs and services that you are trying to provide. Then you have a crowding in and crowding out effect, which could be a plus or a minus. It just depends which one. And the crowding in would be more of a positive. And that's where, like we said, people want to be associated with winners. So if you do get, let's say, an endowment from a local business, and then you can do a lot with that. Then you're getting somewhere, you're accomplishing things, and people might want to be associated with that. They see your organization as doing a lot of good and getting things done, and they want to be a part of that. So they're going to say, hey, I want to volunteer for them, or hey, I want to donate to them. I want to donate to a cause I know is going to work. But on the other hand, it could be a crowding out effect, and that's just one of the quirky parts of the human psyche. People can actually view it as a negative. They can say, well, they got $2 million in endowment. They're fine. They're taken care of. They don't need me to volunteer for them. They got $2 million, or they don't need my $25 donation. They got plenty of money. So it can actually deter donors from supporting your organization. So that's another consideration before jumping in on accepting a resource. So here's the example I have: DonorsChoose.org. Really innovative approach for skilled volunteer labor. So very similar to the Mail-In Foundation. It started out as a sort of this conduit for teachers' projects that needed support. So what teachers would do is they would have an idea for a program or service, and they would upload it to this website. They would post it to this website, and it was a way for funders and donors to search and find programs that they wanted to support. And it's really sort of morphed and grown into this gateway for nonprofits to reach skilled professionals that are willing to provide pro bono volunteer work. So you have these accountants and attorneys, and they've got full-time jobs, they've got families, and maybe they don't want to work for a nonprofit full-time, but they wouldn't mind donating some of their time, 5 hours, 10 hours a week or a month to help out an organization. So it's a way for them to accomplish a personal goal and also help an organization. What I thought was amazing was that 50% of schools have at least one teacher that uses DonorsChoose.org, and their donor population has grown to over 800,000. And that to me is just such a testament to an organization that looks at the external environment, that finds a need, and that is fulfilling that need, which I just think is fantastic. So here's Aaron Hurst, and there's two quotes here that I thought were really appropriate here. The first is his discussion of board members and really what fantastic connections they have, from their professional and personal lives that really lend itself to connecting organizations with these skilled professionals. And the other quote, he mentions how these skilled professional volunteers, it's almost like the holy grail for nonprofits. I mean, any organization will tell you, that people are their biggest assets, and so many organizations spend such a large amount of their funds on labor that really to be able to have such a important, knowledgeable volunteer base is so critical for the health of the sector moving forward. So in conclusion, look, resources come in many forms and from many different sources, and it's really important for nonprofit leaders to understand first their mission needs, and then what resources are appropriate for their organization. They need to plan for growth, build a pipeline of revenue. In order to do that, it's really important to also diversify your resource avenues. And be creative, be adaptable. The environment's always changing, needs are always changing, and nonprofit leaders need to be open and accessible to seeking out and finding new resources when at all possible. And with that, thank you very much.